Good evening, everybody. Welcome to CW Live. My name's Chris Webb, Head of Communications at the CW. It's lovely to be back and it's lovely to be live with you. We've got a great session this evening on Royal Mail pensions. With me is our Deputy General Secretary, Postal, Martin Walsh. Good evening, Martin.
Good evening, Chris. Good evening, everyone.
And our National Officer, Andy Furey, who's been heading up the pensions negotiations. How you doing, Andy?
Good, Chris. Thank you. Good to be on.
So it's good to have both Andy and Martin with us tonight, but more important than them is you, the watching members. We've seen you've got loads of different questions, so I want to explain the format tonight. Both Martin and Andy are going to tackle the big ticket issues, if you like, going to tackle the journey of the pension scheme, where we are now, to pick up some of the key questions. We're also planning other events, so we're going to have a frequently asked questions page on the website. We're going to have an email address where you can email in your specific questions, and we're going to produce a couple of podcasts to make sure that all those detailed questions are picked up, if not tonight, when we get into the more sort of detailed comms planning and comms tools that we've got in our armoury at the CWU. So tonight, pensions, I'm going to ask Martin shortly to get into that, but you may or you may not have seen yesterday the individual bidding for ownership of Royal Mail. Daniel Kretinsky had an interview with the BBC. Coupled in an interview also was our General Secretary, Dave Ward. Let's take a look at that first.
The Czech billionaire who's hoping to take over Royal Mail has said he's committed to delivering letters to every part of the UK 6 days a week, but warned that not all demands by unions can be met. Daniel Kretinsky has made a £3.6 billion bid for the firm, which is awaiting approval by shareholders. He's spoken exclusively to our business editor, Simon Jack.
Things have changed a bit in the 500 years since Royal Mail was founded by Henry VIII. This is the man who wants to be the new owner, Czech billionaire Daniel Kretinsky. So why should he be trusted with such an historic and important asset?
Of course, in a way, you can be paralyzed by the great responsibility that comes from such a such a tradition, from such a name, from the importance of the company. But the answer for me was simple, because I truly believe that we can help now and that we can contribute and we can play our little role, which can, however, be very important in the history of Royal Mail.
Royal Mail is losing money, letter volumes are declining, and its market share in the profitable parcels business has plummeted. Mr. Kretinsky has committed in writing to keep the one price goes anywhere universal service for at least 5 years, but also made this personal promise.
As long as I'm alive, I completely exclude this, and I'm sure that anybody who would be my successor would absolutely understand this.
So why not put that in writing?
Because there are two different things. One thing is what is clearly your commitment, and I say this as an absolutely clear, unconditional commitment. Royal Mail is going to be the provider of universal service obligation in the UK, unconditionally, and I would say forever.
Unions have grave misgivings about the proposed deal.
I can't think of any other country in the world that would just hand over its entire postal service to an overseas equity investor. We believe that there needs to be a different answer that gives workers and customers a greater say over the future direction of the company.
Mr. Kretinsky has guaranteed no compulsory redundancies, but only till next year. But he insists his plan can help secure jobs and a brighter future.
Unions do understand as well that we are on the same ship, and that we need this ship to be successful. And if we are there, we don't have any real problems to deal with, because the sky is blue, and is blue for everybody.
The unions can't stop this deal, but the government can, and will have the last word later this year.
Interesting stuff there, Martin. Before we get into the pensions debate with yourself and Andy, where are we up to with the takeover? I understand Dave and yourself will be meeting Mr. Kretinsky. You looking forward to that?
Yeah, we'll meet him next Tuesday, Chris, in Mount Pleasant. So obviously we've had dialogue. We've got further dialogue with his second in command, Roman, tomorrow around, our position around a new governance, share of the company for our employees, our members, and also around legal guarantees about franchising, outsourcing to protect our members. So we're still going that route. We've made it quite clear all the time. We think this needs to be scrutinised, and we also recognise that Royal Mail, the current Royal Mail board, has no ambition. The company's not going anywhere, finances not good. You see them coming off the rail last week because they haven't got money to invest in that So, we have to discuss on both strategies. Obviously, Queen's speech didn't talk about renationalising Royal Mail today, so we've got to deal with what we've got to deal with, and that is we've got to meet Daniel Kaczynski, EP, and try and get the best deal if that's going to take off, which protects our members, gives them the greatest say, and moves the company forward.
Thanks, Martin, and I'm sure next week following your meeting we'll catch up with yourself and Dave for more development. Straight on to the pensions then, if I could come to you first, Martin. 7 years in the making, obviously overwhelmingly endorsed by our members. I think we'd have all hoped that this scheme would have been implemented a lot earlier than it has been, but I mean it's been a long journey, it's been a complex journey. I'm going to open up to yourself and Andy throughout the session. We're going to be taking members' questions. To remind you, members watching the show, we're not going to be able to get into tonight with Andy and Dave, like this is my personal situation, this is how long I've been in Royal Mail, this is how much I've got invested in the scheme. We will be setting up multiple outlets for you to ask those type of questions. What we're looking for from Martin and Andy tonight is the overview. So kicking off with you, Martin, good thing, bad thing, what's your initial take on where we are with the new pension scheme?
It should be welcomed, Chris. You've got to go back to 2018 when Royal Mail were closing the Royal Mail PP scheme, career average, and they made it quite clear they were closing that scheme. They wanted to put us all into a DC scheme. So everyone who joined after 2008 went into a defined contribution scheme, which clearly isn't very good schemes in that much. Union campaigned, fought for a different scheme. It's taken far too long. It needed primary, secondary legislation, and it's taken 7 years. Under the 4 pillars, those people who remember that, you voted for the pension scheme, the principles around that pension scheme, and the union's now achieved it. Now, there's a number of things to be said on this scheme, and we're not going to ever, deceive people. But DB schemes, defined benefit schemes, are the best schemes. But the reality is we haven't had a defined benefit scheme since 2008, and most unions have seen defined benefit schemes attacked, reduced, or made into a 2-tier scheme. So we had to try and campaign for a different scheme. This is, what we called a collective defined contribution scheme, where for the first time there will be one united scheme. When I joined in '85, I was in the POS scheme, and then people who joined after 1988 went into a POP scheme, so there was 2 different schemes. People who joined before me was in the civil service scheme. So there's always been a variety of different schemes. This will be one united scheme. So we can say, hand on heart, those people who've joined after 2008, the defined contribution scheme, this is a much better scheme. And we believe it will be a very good scheme for everyone else. On the basis, all the research has looked back 80 years, and apart from 3 years, it's continued to pay down. I want to obviously say a couple of things because I think it's important. People, there's been a lot of good work. Terry Pullinger before me, this was something he campaigned. Andy sitting next to me, he's done a lot of work on this, and the pension trustees for these, Kevin Carey and Alan Tate, has done an incredible job moving this on. So I want to say that, but in terms of where we're going, it's taken a long time, and people will quite rightly say, I'm in 3 or 4 different pension schemes. We're in the process of producing a booklet which will take people on a journey, so it will explain if they started in POS, they started in POPs, they had a career average, a cash balance, and now what this scheme is. We're hoping to produce that over the next couple of months, so it gives people a better sort of vision around what pension schemes are. In terms of, obviously, Royal Mail, why have Royal Mail opted this? Why is this a little bit more safer? For Royal Mail, they don't have to increase their pension contribution, so for them it gives them some assurances. In the past, schemes would always increase Royal Mail's contributions. This scheme actually gives employee contributions of 6%, and the company is 13.6. There is an additional sort of booster which we would encourage people to do, and that means that if they pay 1% more, the company matches that with 1% more. So there's going to be a lot of information up to October 7th when this is introduced. We're obviously going to be supporting that communication. We want people to join it. We want people. Now there are some downsides to this, and we want to be as open and honest. It was in the 4 pillars. 67 is the age which people receive the benefits on that. It wasn't something we could change for a variety of reasons, but we are, it's like all pension schemes, we should be aiming to improve it. Now, what we know is a DB scheme, Royal Mail PP scheme, has a surplus between 1 billion and 1.4 billion. And we can jointly use that to improve parts of the pension scheme and other aspects of it. And one of our aspirations is definitely, can we use some more money in the future to reduce that 67 back to 65? And that is a strategy which the union wants to adopt and want to work. But this scheme has been funded on the basis of 67, so we're not hiding from that. But overall, it should be welcome news. There's one united scheme, and it's better than a DC scheme, and we're determined to make sure we improve this scheme going forward.
Thanks, Martin. We'll come back on that. The 67 age limits, there's been quite a few people asking questions. Andy, obviously you've been leading negotiations for the union more recently on this issue. Your take on the impending introduction?
Well, I think we should first and foremost welcome this scheme, as Martin says. We should be encouraged by it because it is one scheme for all. All of our members will be auto-enrolled into the scheme once you've done a year's employment. So prior to the year's from entry into the job to 1 year, people will go into what's called a nest scheme. From there on in, you'll be in the collective plan. The collective plan, so it's one scheme for all, is vitally important. Pensions are of paramount importance to people in the future. We mustn't underestimate how important they are. And they're a massive part of our members' overall contractual terms and conditions. Pay is important, what you get at the end of the week or the end of the month is important, but having a wage in retirement and a decent lump sum to look forward to, guaranteed lump sum to look forward to when you do retire is of vital importance. As Martin has said, this is significant numbers. Nearly 20% is going into the scheme, made up with the employee paying 6%, and the company, Royal Mail, paying 13.6%. So nearly 20% of your wages is going into the scheme every week or every month, and that will guarantee the lump sum in the future and a wage in retirement. So that should be looked forward to. And that the point about this is, and we've read lots of comments about this is the third or the fourth scheme that people are going to be in. The reality is that in 2008, that Royal Mail closed the defined benefit scheme. So for the last 16 years, everybody that's joined Royal Mail is in a defined contribution scheme, which is obviously inferior to defined benefit. And something like 90,000 people are in that defined contribution scheme. So this is going to be much, much better in that it's the first of its kind. It's in the UK. There are collective schemes elsewhere in the world that the model is Holland and Canada, but in the UK, this is the very, very first collective plan scheme. It had to go through, as Martin said, had to get legislation from the last government. It was supported by all political parties. Actually, it wasn't argued about in Parliament. The Labour Party, Lib Dems, Conservatives all wanted this scheme. We met with ministers, including Royal Mail and ourselves, Unite, and we lobbied for this scheme. And so we're pleased that it's coming forward. It also had to get the approval of the pension regulator. That's vitally important because it can't get off the ground without the support of the pension regulator. So all of the modelling and all of the detail had to be approved and had to go through that governance process. There is an independent trustee. The CW's got 3 seats on that trustee board. United's got 1 seat and Royal Mail's got seats on it as well. And of course there are professional pensions experts on the board, independently led chairperson as well. So all the governance arrangements are in place. It applies from the 7th of October. So it's right and proper that we're doing communications now. It's been a couple of weeks since Royal Mail wrote out to everybody with the legal letter advising that the scheme should come into being. And between now and then, as you say, Chris, we've got a good plan for engagement so that people can work out what it means to them. But overall, we're pleased with this because we think, in the absence of having a defined benefit scheme, which obviously would be our preference for everybody, that boat unfortunately has sailed. This is clearly the way forward, and we would commend it to our members to get behind it. The 2 critical points that we really do want to plug, and even if we reiterate this and re-emphasise it's important to get this across, is the matched 1% booster. We want members to consider that seriously. We can't give financial advice, but we can point you in that direction. And also the AVCs as well, the additional voluntary contributions as they're called, and you've got the entitlement and right to take them out as well, and we'd signpost you in the direction of them as well.
Thanks, Andy. Excellent, mate. Thank you, both of you. So we've got loads of questions, as you'd expect. So I want to try and get through as many as we can, so just keep that in mind with our times. And also want to obviously be done nice and informal for you can sort of piggyback on each other's answers if you feel the need to. So I want to come to Alan Houghton, who's raised a really good point, actually, and one I've noticed that's been raised by lots of members in that Alan and other members have been trying to contact the pensions helpline for advice, and the people manning that have been saying, you can see there, Alan said a few members got questions about the pensions, but the people on the helpline have not been trained. So where can members go? Obviously, I mean, we've pointed out there that we're going to be producing a range and a suite of communications to help out with that question, but I've seen other members in the chat saying the same thing, that they have been contacting the helpline for advice, and the helpline staff are saying they haven't been trained. Not the best start, really, I guess, to build confidence, Martin.
No, and look, we met with Michael Snape and Angela Goff a few weeks ago, where we're conscious that anyone going to a financial advisor, you're talking about £3,000. So our members can't afford that. Whereas we were pushing them to see whether they could work to have some financial advice and use a company. And I think they're in support of that. But I think they're saying that won't take place till early sort of next year, towards the end of the financial year. So we'll still push that. In terms of, obviously people don't normally give financial advice unless they're trained, because this is a very complex issue. But I mean, Andy knows there's a comprehensive plan to try and communicate, but where individuals ring up and say, what can I take, etc., it is difficult to give financial advice. It's against the law.
Andy, so another question that's coming I want to get in is on the members asking a question around the cash balance scheme, and do they physically have to leave or exit the cash balance scheme? That's been a question that's been coming up from some of our members.
Okay, if I may just add to the last question. So Royal Mail has recruited a number of key pension administrators. They're going through significant training around this scheme. The current pensions helpline is designed for the current schemes, and that's where their knowledge and expertise is. Now, there has to be almost a firewall between the old schemes and the people administering that and organising the support and help for that on the helpline, and the new scheme. And the helpline for the new scheme won't actually go live until the 7th of October. So we need to be very, very clear that if people ring the helpline now, that those people are equipped to deal with the current schemes. And I've got some statistics, and they really tell a story. As of today, Royal Mail have actually only received 134 calls on the pension helpline, which is a drop in the ocean compared to 130,000 letters going out. What Royal Mail want to do, and we support this, is to direct people towards the websites. There's two websites. There's the microsite that the Royal Mail's got up that's dedicated to this scheme, and also the collective plan themselves. The trustee of the collective plan, they've got their own websites. Now, on both those websites, there are frequently asked questions, many frequently asked questions, and there is lots of documents on there that can be downloaded, read, and we would encourage people to go before those schemes. In terms of the cash balance, the monies that have been accrued in that scheme over the last 6 to nearly 7 years, those monies will remain in that scheme, and they will be ring-fenced and protected and safeguarded, and those monies will continue to be invested. There'll be a proper investment plan, and that will ensure the growth in those monies and the benefit going forward. You can't transfer the money from the cash balance scheme into the new collective plan. That facility is not there as yet, but as Martin's already said, the union has an agenda to improve the scheme, and one of the things that we will be looking at is, and I know Royal Mail is prepared to look at that, is whether if people can transfer monies from other schemes into the new scheme. At the moment it can't happen from the 7th of October, so therefore the money that's accrued over the last 6 to 7 years in the cash balance scheme is secured, protected and ring-fenced, and that money's guaranteed as a lump sum going forward.
Thank you, Andy. Brilliant. Martin, so many people have asked it that, it'd be wrong to avoid it, but it was also on my list anyway, is during that period, the union made a decision to, pursue the path that we now reach, which is the CDC scheme, and the DB scheme was ended. Other unions in other industries faced attacks on their pensions, some of which have moved to a DB scheme, and some of which carried on fighting and have ended up protecting the defined benefit scheme. Did the union call it right in terms of how it handled the pension situation back then?
I think it's difficult, Chris. When they ended the final salary scheme in 2008, we suddenly had thousands of people in the defined contribution scheme. So if you're going to unite behind one scheme, we wouldn't have got a yes vote, because by 2018 we had over 40,000 in a different scheme. So it's very difficult on pensions to unite. If everyone was in the DB scheme, you might be able to do that, but it was already two pension schemes. I think we called it in the end right. And what we try to do is campaign for a united scheme. And
so just on that, when you say united schemes, that includes Postal, all of Royal Mail Group, Post Office? I mean...
yes, the only one it doesn't include is Royal Mail cleaners
And not the Post Office.
and the Post Office.
Yes. Is there an ambition to change that?
I think on the cleaners it would be an ambition. I think the Post Office is a different employer, so a different pension scheme. So I think we called it right, and we wanted one united scheme. That's difficult when you close a defined benefit scheme. It's always going to be, defined benefit schemes are under attack everywhere, because obviously the risk on the employer is quite significant. So I think in the end we called it right, Chris, but like I said, there's improvements in this scheme which we want to make, but overall it should be welcomed. It's a better scheme than defined contribution scheme, and we believe on the record of what we've seen, this will produce a wage in retirement.
Thanks, Martin. Andy, quite a few members, including Gail Thomas, are asking around the security of this pension scheme. I think it's a really good question, and I guess it's totally understandable as well for the amount of change that happens. If you've been a CW member and worked for Royal Mail Group for 20 years plus, you're potentially in 4 different pension schemes now. And obviously, Martin, off the back of Andy's answer, we've also got the takeover thing looming as well. So there's a general feeling out there of how secure is this pension?
So first and foremost, the Kretinsky and the EP group have actually responded as part of the undertakings for the bid that they would support the collective plan, and they would ensure that it was introduced if it hadn't been by the time they took over. The fact is it's coming in the 7th of October, so they're going to inherit it. and that I think is vitally important. That will help to protect it going forward. But the question you ask about security, that position of security could have applied to any scheme at any point in time. When the new scheme was set up, the RMPP, the Royal Mail plan, pension plan in 2012, the question could have been asked then. Gal could have said, what guarantees of security then? The fact is, as Martin's indicated, that scheme is in surplus of over £1 billion as it currently stands, and that's just since 2012, and it closed in 2018 for future accrual as well. So in a space of 6 years, we've got a very healthy scheme. The trustees have clearly done a magnificent job with their investment plans, and we would expect the same to apply for this scheme going forward. The other thing is that, and of course you think of all the horror stories of Maxwell raiding the pension funds and all the rest of it, but this scheme has only been introduced because of the legislation. So it's gone through an Act of Parliament. There has been secondary legislation behind that's included the DWP and HMRC as well. So it's been through massive scrutiny, and only at that point does it then go before the pension regulator. And the pension regulator's got an obligation to ensure that their scrutiny of any scheme at the point of it starting and also ongoing is protected. So we're confident that as long as there's a Royal Mail going forward, that there will be...
going to be my follow-up question. I mean, obviously we had the privatisation and the underwriting by the government of that scheme, which gave that guarantee, didn't it? That wouldn't be the case with this and now privately owned Royal Mail, would it?
No. So the pre-privatisation, the pension scheme that is in place is called the Royal Mail Statutory Pension Scheme. That was pre-2012. That was taken over by government. The deficit was taken over by government. They couldn't have privatised Royal Mail without taking over that deficit. They've guaranteed that scheme, and that's ring-fenced and it's there forevermore. The new scheme from 2012 is the one with the over £1 billion surplus, and now we got the new scheme. And of course, the new scheme from the 7th of October, the first weekly wage, that monies will be going into that scheme.
Yes.
First monthly salary monies will be going into that scheme, and that will be building up as each week goes by, and that money will be properly and sensibly invested to grow.
Makes sense.
And just add a little bit more to that, Chris. So in terms of EP, part of what they had to do was give guarantees to IDS and the government, and also they have to put intentions, what their intentions for running Royal Mail on both of those aspects. One is they've committed to this plan, this pension scheme. They've agreed they wouldn't take anything from pension surplus, and then on their intentions they said they would continue to contribute to this pension scheme. And I think the important part why this is an employer friendly kind of scheme, in the past DB schemes, depending on what they're worth, their contributions, employer contributions, could go really high. This always caps what they're going to pay. So they know how to budget that, they know how to reassure. And so in terms of how safe this scheme is, providing Royal Mail survive, then we believe it will be safe.
I mean, you've got to take I guess one of the issues I think is really coming through, and I know, Andy's articulated there's going to be loads of comms, there's going to be, we're confident that, over the coming weeks and months, people will get to the right place. But the language, the pseudonyms, the sort of technocratic sort of language used around pensions is a challenge for any of us, really. And our members are busy people, and they're looking at, I think, I heard someone say this just well be written in Chinese, I think was one of the comments earlier on the page. How can we get to the point where, like, between us, and obviously Royal Mail have an obligation on this as well, we're able to simplify the sort of way members understand the pension, Andy?
So, that's a really good question.
One thing. Steve Butts has just put in, one of our reps has put in and saying, is this pension scheme a PSE tax arrangement for example. That's his question. I mean, I've seen other members in the comment going like, "What are you talking about?" And so just it underlines the level of difficulty with some of the languages, you know.
Yeah, I mean, look, this Royal Mail's agreed to call this the collective plan. So everything that when we talk about this scheme, we're going to call it the collective plan. Collective as in everybody's in it. We're all in it together once you've done 1 year's service. So I think rather than have initials and all the rest of this, let's just refer to it as a collective plan. Then when we're talking about the previous schemes, I mean, of course you can't ignore the previous schemes because they're so vitally important to those people that have been paying into them. So therefore we've got to give reassurance that the new scheme, the collective plan being introduced, it's not done so at a detriment to the earlier schemes. And yes, look, the earlier schemes have got everything's Royal Mail statutory pension scheme. That's the one the government runs. The Royal Mail RMPP, Royal Mail Pension Plan, which members will be getting letters. Members of that scheme will be getting letters any minute now. It might be when you get home tonight. It might already be there. The letter will be landing in the next couple of days because that scheme closes on the 6th of October. No more money will be going into that scheme, and that's what these letters from the RMP trustee tell people. But yeah, look, let's try and keep it simple. It's the collective plan.
Steve Butt's question about the PSC tax arrangement.
I honestly didn't understand that question either, like many people who have come in behind. Steve is what we would affectionately call an anorex when it comes to pensions. So we need to look at that. And look, what we're not going to do is we're not going to give bad advice or legal, financial advice, because that's not our role in this. If we don't know something, we should say we don't know and go away and try and understand it better and find out the answer. So. Look, we're talking to Royal Mail almost daily, and this afternoon I was talking to the head of pensions, Angela Goff, and we were checking understandings of various things. This is complex, and therefore we've got to check understanding, make sure we got it right, because we don't want to give anybody any duff information.
One of the things, Martin, both yourself and Andy touched on was no other way of describing it, huge surplus in the RMPP scheme. What are the union going to be looking to do with that? Is there a use to it? Is that money that could be used to improve the new scheme? Is that money that could go into members' pockets? Is that money best stay in there to protect the pension in the long term? What is the CW view on that?
So we're formulating a strategy. So that 1.4 billion is potentially available for things which will improve people's pensions or terms and conditions. It's got to be joint aim, it's got to be agreed by the trustee, but we want to formulate, does that improve the 67 issue? Does it improve, for example, the delivery supplement going into pensions, or even those people who work in nights, only half of their night allowance is pensionable. So can we move that forward, Chris? So there's a variety of things we want to look at. Clearly there's challenges ahead, the USO challenge next year in terms of reductions. Do we try and look at improving, basically when pensions can be taken to ensure people are better off if they leave the company? So there's a range of things we're going to be doing, and we're talking to some advisors around that. In terms of, information around pensions, we're working on a booklet. Lionel Sampson, Paul Kennedy have done a lot of work in that area, and Paul Kennedy is running courses for union reps who will then train the trainer, be able to give the same sort of sessions to local reps, and local reps will have a little bit more information to give to members. And so we are trying to advise people, but let's be honest, pensions is a complex subject. And I would say in the union headquarters, there's probably about 5 or 6 people who really know pensions inside out. Andy here, like Lionel Sampson, Mark Palfrey, people like that. But not everyone's up to speed on pensions, and we're trying to get that information as much as possible as we can, but we can never give pension advice.
Thanks, Mike. And Mark Palfrey, one of those people you mentioned, is backstage there with some rather fetching headphones on, filtering through your questions, one of which is from Mark Harland, Andy, who's asking, are members able to transfer the money they've accrued from the cash balance scheme into the new collective scheme? Is that an arrangement that's there where we can flow through, if it improves, if it increases value? Is that a possibility?
No.
Yeah,
so,
simple.
I did actually mention this in an earlier contribution, that you can't transfer any pension monies from other pension schemes into the collective plan. That facility is not there at this point in time. Although we are going to be talking about that to Royal Mail, and I know Royal Mail are looking to consider that to see if that's feasible. That will be a debate for the future. It won't happen overnight, but if it does happen, that would be a positive, and we would look to try and do that for some time next year, if feasible, if possible. But there has to be a negotiation. We have to look at that. So the money is ring fenced in the cash balance scheme. That's guaranteed. That's there for the future. It's not impacted by the introduction of the collective plan, and equally it cannot be transferred at this point into the collective plan. Just one other point on the surplus that's in the RMPP, the Royal Mail Pension Plan. The responsibility for that surplus lies with the trustee. That money is the trustee's money. It's not in Royal Mail. It's not in CW's coffers. As much as Royal Mail and the CW will have a view about how that money should be used, it is ultimately down to the trustee as to how that money will be used. And of course, the trustee would want to ensure that if it was used, it was used for the benefit of improving pensions going forward. Hence why Martin's talked about our objectives or our agenda and aspirations for improving things. So, I really want to give reassurance. Royal Mail cannot make a grab for that money because the money sits with the trustee, and it's their ultimate decision where that money goes.
So just looking at the comments, Steve's asking, I think Andy covered this emphatically at the start of the session, mine. Can we have an independent financial advisor on the next session? I mean, just to make it clear to members, the union cannot give people financial advice. That is not our role. In fact, it's not even in line with the law. So no, we can't be doing that. Quite a few members are asking about, how has this come about? Maybe missed the start of the show, and people are saying, one comment I just saw there which made me smile was, why is this being rushed through? So I'm not sure description of 7 years could fit into the definition of rush, but life's busy. In that 7 years, we've had the pandemic, we've had we've had multiple national disputes. People might have missed the point that this was the pension scheme that was agreed as part of the Four Pillars Agreement. By the way, overwhelmingly a massive vote of our members. But obviously now it's like anything, I suppose. Once we've been really keen to get it implemented, get members into the scheme. Now it's happening. Things are moving at pace, aren't they?
Yeah. Look. Just to recap, towards the end of 2018, Royal Mail served notice on the defined benefit scheme, and their proposal was to put everyone into an inferior defined contribution scheme. So the union campaigned for what was called the collective DC scheme, and what that has done is finally the government agreed it, but it had to have primary and secondary legislation, had to be cleared by the pension regulator. And because of the chaos we've seen in Parliament over the last few years, it's taken 7 years to, the cash balance scheme was meant to run for 1 year, because it's run for 7 years. We finally got a date on October 7th, so this hasn't been rushed. And it has been communicated. I have to say, every AGM I went to, and I went to over 30, there was always a question, what's happened to the CDC scheme? So it hasn't been rushed, but I accept we've gone through a lot, the pandemic, we've gone through the disputes, and people might have forgotten this. This was supported in a ballot of the Four Pillars Agreement, the principles around this. So it is quite old. It's now coming up to 6 years old. So coming up to that period. So it's not been rushed, but obviously it takes a long time to go through primary and secondary legislation.
Thanks, Martin. Andy, I mean, obviously you made the point earlier on. I've made the point there about we won't be given, we're unable to give members financial advice. But I've seen a couple of members in the comments who are saying, how do we leave the pension scheme? How do we not be in it? What would you say to members? Obviously, everyone's financial situation is challenging at the minute and difficult, but what sort of plea would you give to members to make sure that they stick in the pension scheme?
Look, first and foremost, you've got an entitlement not to be in the scheme if you don't want to be. But people will be auto-enrolled into it, and they have to say, I don't wish to be in it. I think the first thing that people need to bear in mind is that the employer is putting in 13.6% of your wages, your salary, into the scheme. I hear it called free money. It's money the employer's putting in. You don't have to do anything for that. You just have to be a scheme member. So 13.6% is going in, and then you put in 6% of your wages. So yes, of course, that's 6% that you would otherwise have, but it's going into a pension scheme along with the 13.6%, and that money is then designed to give you a guaranteed lump sum when you retire at 67 and a wage in retirement going forward. And that's the key tenets and principles of the scheme. So we would suggest that if the company's putting 13.6% in, that's a windfall. That's a freebie. You've got to contribute 6%, and then you will see the benefits of that. The early indications are actually that 400 people, I got the statistics came over early on this morning, 400 people that weren't previously in the scheme have now opted to come into this scheme. Brilliant. And that's a real positive. You could be in what's called the nest scheme, the nursery scheme, but as opposed to being in the collective plan. But the nest scheme is inferior in terms of the employer's contribution is only 4% as opposed to 13.6%, and you put in 5%. So in total, 9% is going into the nest scheme, of which the member puts in 5%. When you compare that with nearly 20% going into the collective plan, of which you put in 6%. So, I think that those numbers for themselves would commend the scheme to people, along with the fact that it has been introduced by legislation, so that should give some comfort and reassurance, and it's been supported by the pension regulator, and we've got an independent board of trustees. So all of these safeguards and measures should protect people and their money, because you're investing for the future, and everybody wants a future, and they want to be able to have a degree of comfort in life after work, and for as long as possible. So that's why it was so important to have this agreement. It made me smile about why is it being rushed through, because as you've heard, it's been 7 years in the making nearly. The 4 pillars dispute, I'm just looking at the 4 pillars agreement, and it was actually the very first pillar 1, and it was headed up a pension solution for all. That was our policy and aspiration as determined by conference. We had ballots and disputes around it all, and finally we got an agreement, and that agreement was overwhelmingly endorsed. And when you look at the agreement, the key features of the proposed scheme was outlined in the 4 pillars agreement, and all those key features have flowed through to the final scheme. So we've been consistent in what we've promised to members. It's just taken a lot longer than we would have wanted.
Thank you, Andy. Martin, this is a final question before I give yourself and Andy the opportunity to round up the session. Carl says, and the reason I'm asking this because he's asked 3 times, he's very eager. Carl says, I'll say it again. We saw you, Carl, the first time, my friend. A CDC scheme is definitely inferior to a DC scheme. Now, that's not the view of the union, is it?
No, it's not a view of the union. I would agree with him on DB schemes, but I don't think it's basically anywhere near. Now, I think the other question to Andy is there is a law that you are auto-enrolled into a pension scheme. So if you opt out of this pension scheme, you will still be auto-enrolled into an inferior nest scheme. And Andy's point is you'll be paying 5%, but the employer pays a lot less. So clearly we would encourage people to join this pension scheme where you'll pay 6%, but the employer pays 13.6%.
Thank you, Sparman. Andy, any final thoughts, close session from yourself?
In relation to that comment by Carl, the the defined contribution scheme that's with Scottish Widows that's been in place since 2008 doesn't provide a wage in retirement, whereas the collective plan does. It also, guarantees a lump sum.
Yeah.
So those are two key vital aspects, and the reason why it's a collective plan is the monies are pulled together to create a better investment opportunity. The DC scheme, the defined contribution scheme, is individual investments, whereas this is collective, and that gives you more ability to invest better and get better results from that investment. But in closing, there's two things I really want to highlight. Is one, if you've got questions or you want to understand this better, please do go on the websites, the Royal Mail microsite for the collective plan. There is frequently asked questions on there. There's so much information on there. It's incredible. Also, please do have a look at the lump sum booster. I can report that 8,500 people have already, through the People app, have applied for the lump sum booster. So 8,500 people, many of them will be CW members, some of them may be managers, but 8,500 people have already said, I want to have that booster of 1% extra being paid in and getting 1% from the employer, matched 1%. So that's 8,500 people that are going to have an extra 2% going into the lump sum guaranteed. So it's a lump sum booster. And on the additional voluntary contributions, the AVCs as they're called, those people that have AVCs at the moment in the Scottish Widows, that will cease on the 6th of October. For you to want to have a new AVC, you've got to apply again through the People app. And as of this morning, 2,000 of the scheme members have already applied for an AVC as well as the 19.6%. So you can have an additional voluntary contribution in this scheme as well as the old DC scheme as well, where you could have that. So, I mean, I think those numbers speak for themselves, but from the union's perspective, we would like to see those numbers increase. So we would urge people to have a look at those two things, the lump sum booster and the AVCs, and see if those work for you. And if they do, apply for it on the People app.
Spot on, Andy. Martin, your closing thoughts?
Look, picking up on some of the questions, some of the noise, pensions is a complex subject, and people have lots of questions around how it fits in with their lives individually. We're going to try and support you as much as we can without obviously breaking the law in terms of giving you financial advice. But this is a scheme where we've been fighting for one scheme for a number of years. We've now got this date of the 7th of October. We're going to try and communicate as much as we can, answer as many questions as we can. But the important bit is this is still going to be a very good scheme. It's not going to be as good as a defined benefit, but it's going to be a good scheme where the employer will pay 13.6 contributions, and much better than the Nest scheme. We're going to obviously do a couple more like this, but our advice is join up, look at the booster, because again, for 1% you get 1% in return. So you'll be paying 7% and the employer will be paying 14.6. So it's quite good value. There are things we want to improve, but we're taking a longer approach on that. But please make sure you take some notice around this scheme, read it up. It was part of our 4 pillars dispute in 2018. We finally achieved it through primary and secondary legislation, and we'd ask you to join it because we do think that is the best step in terms of getting a wage in retirement.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Andy. Thank you both for your time. But as always, most crucially, thank you to our members who have tuned in. It's been brilliant to see your questions. We want to reassure you, as we've said throughout the show, that there's going to be loads and loads of opportunities to put your questions on pensions to us via various means. And we're also working with Royal Mail to make that as easy and as accessible as possible. I think it's a fantastic testament, really, this scheme being introduced, to all of your work and your support for the union all those years ago with balloting and campaigning and making sure we've arrived here today. Also, on today, maybe poignant as well, he's made a sort of King's speech, the implementation of the New Deal for Workers, another thing that you can take tremendous credit for, the CW-led campaign. So today, a historic day in many ways. You get to hear information about a new pension scheme, groundbreaking pension scheme led by your union. As Martin said, we'll be looking for more and more improvements on that. And also your union right at the heart of government, creating change and improving terms and conditions for millions of workers across the CW. Really, really strong day to be a CW member, and we'll hope for many, many more of those to come. So from us, thank you, and please keep tuning in. We're going to be, not next week, we're on the road. Again, taking the show up, we'll be bringing you a feature from Royal Mail unit reps briefing up in Liverpool, and much, much more as we get back into a variety of content. But from us, from now, stick with your union.